Hello everyone and welcome to another very nice game from round 4 of this year's European Club Cup. We have Magnus Carlsen versus Alexey Sarana, Magnus representing his club Ootes and Sarana representing Sentimento IK BSK. And the reason I didn't cover it yesterday, I thought that the game was a draw, as all of the websites showed that on move 37 in what could only be described as an equal position, the players agreed to a draw, and I didn't put much thought into it. But later I found out that that was not really where the game ended. For some reason, I have no idea why. Ever since chess.com bought everything just stopped working. Like, it's very, very hard to actually find a working PGN. Most of the times Leeches has it perfect cover, but now Leeches had it wrong, Chess24 had it wrong, other separate websites had it wrong. And someone wrote in the comments that there is a full PGN on chess.com, so that's where I pulled it from. So that's why I didn't show it yesterday, because it's a very, very strong game. So let's check it out. Magnus has the white pieces, and he opens with e4. And so far, Magnus is on 100% in his games. He won all the games that he played. And of course, having the white pieces. This is his strongest opponent so far in the event, he does have the white pieces, and he chooses a very, very exciting opening. So c5, knight f3, d6, and now going for bishop to c4. This is actually the 5th most popular continuation, and the one that really shouldn't give any advantage to white whatsoever, but that's pretty much what Magnus is going for in this event. He just wants to play chess, on equal terms from move 1, and throw his opponent, of course, out of protective waters of opening theory as soon as possible. So knight f6, knight to c3, e6, and now he strikes, in the center with pawn to d4. We have captures, and now queen captures on d4. Knight captures is a bit more popular, but knight captures on d4 only a handful of games, and one of the players that actually played queen captures on d4 is in this position is Jordan Pamfores, who is one of Magnus's seconds and part of Magnus's camp where he trains, so maybe that has something to do with it. But okay, knight to c6 attacks the queen, queen d3, and now pawn to a6 with bishop to f4, putting pressure on that d6 pawn, so hoping to castle here. And Alexey plays a very, very cool move, and that is knight to g4. Now, the position has been reached before. b5 has been played here, bishop to e7 has been played, even knight h5 going after the bishop. But knight to g4 has never been played, and it is now, as of move 8, that we have a completely new game. So the idea is that, okay, you can't castle queenside because Alexey will just capture the pawn on f2. So Magnus has to figure out what to do with the king, and he starts by going rook to d1. So just putting more pressure on that d6 pawn, and Alexey goes queen to b6. Now attacking the b2 pawn, but the real threat, of course, being queen captures on f2 checkmate. So Magnus stops this by playing queen to d2, and now we have bishop to e7, just continuing development. If you're wondering about the juicy b2 pawn, well, we could show what happens. You sort of trap the queen with bishop to b3, and then after the queen tries to escape, you go pawn to h3. You kick away the knight, knight f6, and now e5, and already black has some problems here. For example, if d captures, knight captures, you cannot capture with the knight due to checkmate on d8, and you're going to have to play bishop to e7 to cover that, prepare the castle. Now knight c4 attacks the queen, and knight to d6 check next will prevent black from ever castling, and the white will have an excellent game. So that's why you don't capture on b2 here. So bishop to e7, and now comes bishop to b3. We have knight g to e5, also a very standard idea in pretty much all the Sicilian games. You want to get your knight to e5, and then if white captures, you can choose between capturing with a piece or playing d captures on e5, as even if you double your pawns, you will have a very nice control of all the central squares here. So pawn to h4 by Magnus, trying to discourage Alexey from castling kingside. We have queen to c7, adding additional support to the d6 pawn, and also preparing to push on the queen side. Bishop to g5, and now pawn to b5. We have bishop captures on e7. Idea being that now you can't really capture with the queen. This would allow Magnus to capture on d6, so king captures is played, and now queen to g5 with check. King to f8, and now rook to h3, going for a kingside attack with rook to g3. So h6, Alexey kicks the queen back, queen to d2, and now bishop to b7. And this is sacrificing a pawn for activity. If Alexey wanted, he could just play king back to e7, and then we would see something like rook to g3, rook to g8, maybe the knights get traded off, but after d captures on e5 and queen e3, Okay, you could play it. The rook not very active here. The king on e7. You have a doubled pawn here, which we already discussed that it's really not a bad doubled pawn as you control a lot of space here. So it's a matter of personal preference. But here bishop to b7 was played. Alexey sacrifices a pawn for activity, and now it's time for Magnus to prove if it's doable. Now you could play queen captures on d6 first, or you could play knight captures on e5 first. So Magnus plays knight captures on e5 first, sort of allowing d captures on e5, which would save Alexey the pawn, but then you allow queen d7. It's really a too active move to allow. For example, queen captures, rook captures, you have to guard the bishop, and it's just a really bad position. Rook f3 goes after the pawn here. Like f6, okay, you can defend. Rook g3 goes after the other pawn, so it's not the best. So that's why after knight captures on e5, Alexey has to trade here. Knight captures, queen captures on d6, queen captures, and the rook captures. So now Magnus is up a pawn, and king to e7 attacks the rook. We have rook back to d1, and now pawn to g5. Now all of his pieces are active. Pawn to a3, stopping pawn to b4, and bishop to c6 now, preparing to push on the queen side as you need your b5 pawn defended. Bishop to a2, and now pawn to a5. We have h captures on g5, h captures, and Magnus trades on h8. Rook captures, and now, of course, pawn to b4. This is the absolute strongest move recommended by the engine, as it often is. So a captures on b4, a captures, and rook to h4 now, putting pressure on that e4 pawn, and Magnus defends it with pawn to f3. So of course Alexey goes with a pawn push on g4 to undermine it, and now pawn to f4. We have knight to g6 attacking the f4 pawn. Now comes pawn to g3 and the rook to h1 check. King d2, rook to h2 check, king to c1, and rook h3 attacking the g3 pawn. Now rook to d3. We have rook to h1 check, king to b2, and now rook to e1 going behind the pawn here, and now pawn to e5. So Magnus defends everything, and he is still up a pawn. And now if you look at the position, how is Alexey to continue this game? The bishop, while a very nice piece controlling this long diagonal, all of Magnus's pawns on the king side are on dark squares. Even the pawn on b4 is on a dark square, and you can't really do all that much with the light square bishop. So how do you attack the g3 pawn? Well, you could attack it with the rook, but you also could attack it with the knight. You have to move the king, play knight to e7, knight to f5, and then really put pressure on that g3 pawn. And by, asking yourself such a question, how do I approach this, you find your next move easily, and that is king to e8, bring up the e7 square for the knight. So okay, knight to d1, Magnus counters this immediately. Now if knight to e7 is played, now just knight to e3 guarding the f5 square, so nothing really happening here. So bishop to e4 attacking the rook, and rook to d2, and this is basically where all of the websites have shown that the game ended in a draw and that no more moves were played, when that in fact could not be further from the truth. And here the move to play is not the move Sarana played. He played rook to g1, which is very nice. It's actually the second strongest move recommended by the engine, but the top move is knight captures on f4. And now Magnus cannot capture back. If he captures back, then g3. And what do you play here? The g2 square is covered by the bishop, the g1 square covered by the rook. So once g2 is played, you're going to have to give up your rook for this pawn. For example, knight c3, okay, you could attack the bishop, but just bishop f3 with the g2 next, and you win the exchange, you're going to have a great game. So after knight captures on f4, you're going to have to play knight to f2, attack the bishop and the pawn here, and once the knight moves, now you're going to capture on g4, and okay, the game continues. Magnus still having a lot of pressure on the position here, but all in all, should be a draw. However, after this, rook to g1 was played, and now comes knight to c3. Now Magnus says, okay, you have your g3 pawn, I'm going to have the b5 pawn, and now again bishop to c6 is the way to go. Alexey goes for bishop to f3, he keeps the bishop and gets ready to capture on g3 and start pushing the g pawn. Knight captures on b5, and now rook captures on g3. So it's it looks like a very double-edged position, but the truth of the position says completely otherwise. Magnus is completely winning here, so feel free to pause the video and find the winning move while I give you a couple of seconds. And this is move 39, so one more move had to be made to reach time control. So do your best. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on always studying the endgame and becoming a true master of the endgame. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is pawn to f5. This is such a devastating move for black that doesn't matter how you meet it, you will very quickly perish. Now, of course, if e captures on f5, which is kind of a the obvious thing to do, knight to d6 check. And now if you go here, or if you go here, sorry, that's a weird arrow. Any of these moves will be punished with knight captures on f5, and it will either be a fork on e7 or a discovery from the rook here, and you just pick up the rook on g3 for free. So the only move is king to f8, and now again knight captures on f5 wins the rook, because if you save the rook, then rook to d8 is checkmate. The knight covers these two squares, e7 and g7, and rook d8 will be checkmate. So after f5, you cannot touch the f pawn. You have to play knight captures on e5, which is the strongest move, but it doesn't help all that much, because what does Magnus play now? And this was the really hard move to find when you decided to play f5, and that is pawn to f6. Absolutely incredible. Now again covering e7 and g7, and now if you play something like rook to g2, let's say you offer a rook trade, here comes knight to c7 check, king f8, and rook to d8 checkmate. So you don't have time for such a move. You have to play knight to d7, only move that keeps the game going for Alexey. Now knight to d6 check, and now look at this. If you go king to d8, and king to d8 is the absolute best move for black, that sort of keeps black in the game, then you capture on f7 with check. You have to go to c7, and then after knight to g5, preparing to advance this pawn, you will play knight captures. Now comes knight captures on e6 with check, king to c6, and bishop to c4, cutting off the king from the b5 square, and now you start advancing the pawn. You're up a pawn, and you should win this game with white, but still black can give you a lot of problems. However, after king to f8, the game is now completely winning for Magnus, and I'm sure you guys know the move because it's the theme of the position, and that, of course, is knight to f5. This is what Magnus played, and it was in this position on move 43 that Alexey Sarana resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Why do you resign here? Well, the rook is undefended on g3, which means you either give up the rook, or you take the knight, or you move the rook, but doesn't really matter. For example, you capture the knight, rook captures on d7, checkmate being threatened here, so you have to play this. Now rook e7 check, king to d8, and rook captures on f7, and there's just no stopping the f pawn. For example, rook h3, you go bishop to e6. Now put pressure on these pawns, and if g3, you play rook to d7 check, king e8, f7 with check, king f8, and now rook to d8 with check. The pass pawn on f7 is defended. King g7, you can now play f8 queen, and very quickly you get checkmate at king h7. Bishop captures on f5 will be checkmate, and any other move doesn't really help you. So you either take or you lose the rook, but that doesn't really matter. Like, you could play rook to g1, just move the rook, then rook captures on d7, you're down a piece, still checkmate is being threatened. There's just no way out of this. So yeah, very good game by both of them. Sarana really held his own with the black pieces here, but after this idea of not defending the pawn on b5 with bishop to c6, he went for bishop to f3 and went for this trade. f5, the threat of f5, f6 completely destroyed him, and it's a position that you could have very often against the Sicilian pawn e5, pawn to f4, and if you know these sort of motives, then you will be able to maybe employ such a tactic in your own games. Now, you're not going to have the exact same position, but just knowing the idea might, get you a different idea that will help you win the game, or draw, or, just to solve the position. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Magnus remaining on 100%, 3 wins out of 3 games. Very nicely done. I would like to thank Alireza. Dreamio is the best data lake engine. Kate Ingram, Dennis Charbonneau, and Mr. Hoodie Guy for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And the simultaneous exhibition against Alireza is starting soon. You still have a chance to play him. First link in the description below. Everything is explained. See you soon.